Thank you for introducing me. Thank you for inviting me. I don't really feel like being in the position of speaking about the issues of conservation art or preserving, but unfortunately nobody from the other members of the Vasulka kitchen could attend here, so I came to represent this little group. It is not institution, it's more like a group of people. We have 10 members, and the project was actually founded by 2 or 3 friends 2 years ago, in 2018 in Brno, because Ludwig Vasulka is born in Brno. He was visiting his hometown since he left to United States in 1965 quite often, and especially in the 90s, he was coming frequently when he was in Europe to see his family and to see the people he felt related to. But since Czech are a little bit slow, or Czech and Moravians, it took about 18 years to establish this small society. Anyway, let's hope it will survive. It's actually similar with the legacy of Wilhelm Flusser, who was also born in Prague, and his institute was finally founded in Berlin, not in Prague, as we have been trying to do in 1995. And so I will just shortly present kind of in the context of one chapter from Vasulka's work, which I expect, or I hope that nobody he was here present is a specialist on, and it is one of the last period or narrative of Ludwig Vasulka, especially, not so much Steina, I think, because I don't know if you aware, but Ludwig died on 20th of December last year. So his work can be seen as accomplished in a way, but if you watch it from the perspective of the artist, who was always like hoping to project his own thoughts and concept in his work, and we can also consider that it is continuing definitely in the person of his 50 years collaboration with Steina, with his partner and artistic partner as well. And so this, I came with the idea to try to make a little research about this special story about Ludwig Vasulka attempts to experiment with second life. When I read the description of the theme, of the framework of this conference, like the internet, end of the internet, and then I made some research to find out what can be found, what is still left about maybe 2-3 years attempts of experiments of Vasulka's with this 3D simulation online environment, and I couldn't find almost anything. Then I made a research, like not on internet, but through some people which have been in contact with Woody and Steina, and I finally found some materials on the hard drive of a friend who was hosting Woody when he was visiting Prague about 2009, 2010. Which is a kind of like special case, which I think is symptomatic for the approach of the Vasulkas to their own work. They, I think, since the beginning of the 70s, were involved in many collaborative projects where it was this kind of ethos of the time, that the individual artist is not so important as the collective, as a collaborative unit. Copy it right. It was their own kind of credo, and especially last 20 years, the kind of strategy of Woody and Steina was, if you come to any place in the world and you find people who are interested in their work, they came with the here's my hard drive, copy it and keep it here, and you can do what you want with it. We are happy that as much as possible this kind of notes are existing. Because it is somehow helping to survive what we have been doing for so many years. So the material of the Second Life project is consisting of about 20 videos, kind of educational videos, where the guy who was teaching Woody and Steina what can be done with Second Life concerning their own archiving activities what can be used for. So it is Second Life, this environment, and also it is Second Life is actually now the real state of existence of Woody since 1.5 months. What is actually quite substantial, I mean, my talk is not really discursive, it's more kind of associative, is that especially Woody, I think, was since the 70s quite interested in, or he was actually obsessed not only by machines, but also looking for some kind of autonomous space, which can be used and can be colonized by artists. Of course, it's a long time before the internet, but what Woody was claiming or hoping from this not centric or not human or post-human space is, I will quote it, in the media sense, space is what you create. It is a machine-made space, and these are manufactured pieces of information that are drawn into a cognitive content, and it eventually becomes a product of machinery. This carries through to computer, since all modalities of space are represented in that machine by simply organizing data structures. It is basically a new territory of representation of the world. So they've been actually conceptually engaged with looking of this media space, which should be, from their point of view, as much of separated from the real space or physical space. So Vasulka started their own archiving activities since they've been involved in the founding of this electronic kitchen in New York in 1971, which then consists in organizing an event in a kind of theater, little theater in Manhattan, and We've been curating this place for about 4 years. After 4 years, they moved to Buffalo to be invited, being invited by George O'Grady. And after teaching there on the university, they managed to spare some money to buy a little house in Santa Fe. They moved in 1980 or 1979, and their new house became their studio, but also the living place. And they took with them hundreds of tapes and materials, as much as possible, the machines which they've been collecting last 15, 20 years. So the home, the house, Adobe house in Santa Fe became the laboratory and archive at the same time. So there are famous pictures of Woody and Steina dealing with machines, with apparatus. I think it's a question to think about, but why they choose Santa Fe? Because a lot of artists and kind of visionary artists moved from East Coast to West Coast, and New Mexico became as not only center of the Santa Fe Institute, where the researchers or scientists have been developing this chaos theory, but also a lot of musicians and media artists. So they have been also joining kind of community of people who are being who they felt connected to. But what to do with this legacy, with these machines and tapes? During their own career, they managed to find several institutions who were interested to support kind of dealing with the archives. One of them was mentioned here. It's Daniel Langlois Foundation in Montreal, who helped them to scan and partly structurize the archive. I think they were not really involved in digitalization of the tapes, but I think the kind of upper framework or level of the idea of the archive is this how we are dealing with the memory. It was also the concept of Woody, two kind of narrative works. The main, most famous kind of narrative video is Art of Memory, which he accomplished in 1987, but in a way he was continuing with this idea until his death. The kind of atmosphere or the tuning of the piece is quite melancholic and sad, and he's dealing here with his specially kind of imprinted memories from his childhood when he was experiencing end of the Second World War in Brno. He was always talking about his being encountered with dead bodies and the technology, and his kind of ambivalent approach or relationship to technology, and kind of hate-love technology relationship is quite present in his piece. But in the same time, he was very his way of thinking was very kind of grid-oriented, which is represented here in this picture, which is kind of putting things in order and looking for some relationships and different levels of interconnections. But in the same time, if you look on the physical space of a studio, I know it is more related or connected to this chaos theory of the Santa Fe Institute, which was in the neighborhood. Anyway, what maybe I forgot to tell that the archive of the Vasulka archive is not only a collection of their own works, like Woody and Steina together, which have been working for some years under this title of the Vasulkas, but also separately, but also they've been collecting all the works which they could somehow preserve and keep from all the people. They've been like dozens of people have been working since the New York period. In the Woody is talking about it in his in several interviews that he was kind of shocked how his American colleagues are what is their approach to their own work, that they didn't care about if it will continue or not, or be crashed or whatever. And what is famous, I just mentioned it, is that especially Woody had this ambition to be also a curator. When he was in Santa Fe for 10 years, he was approached by Peter Weibel, with his colleagues from Santa Fe, to curate this famous exhibition in Linz, Eigenwelt der Apparaten Welt, which was only what remains is some video documentation and this catalog of machines of all these people who have been developing and designing prototypes of video and audio processing machines since the 70s. With Peter Weibel, he also worked as a curator on this famous exhibition in ZKM in 2008, which is kind of mapping in the several years of this group of people working in a Buffalo, among the others, the Vasulkas. And here is the only still existing website of the Vasulkas archive, which is transcoded in the website. The website is still on. The content is not really updated. Some of the videos are not possible to play anymore. But look, images, there are documents, interviews, whatever. And coming to this Second Life chapter, I think this is the kind of background where the Second Life idea, to move their physical archive into virtual space was created during the period when they founded in Santa Fe this art and science laboratory, which they called Techne and Eros. They have been collaborating there with David Dunn, who is one of the curators of this Eigenwelt der Apparate, and his colleague James Crutchfield, the physicians. So this is the description which I found not on the Vasulka archive, but somewhere else. So this is the idea what to do with the quite varied legacy. You know, they have been collecting for several thousand years. So accommodation of contemporary media archives through dynamic format of open simulation. So this comes to the idea of simulation. And environment of dramatic confrontation between data structures, images, and finally 3D objects, now with the full ability of being manipulated and controlled on the web. So here comes first time actually the idea that the web is the right place where you can represent the content, the web, you know, because I think they both are coming from this generation of people who have been projecting their own kind of hope in the networks, in the web, and the internet, and or the web have been. It was the space where we will actually reach some not second life, but second stage of being connected to the humanity and to the world, or whatever, you know. The necessity of such a confrontation stems from the content and context of more contemporary archival items, mainly property acquired through the process of electronic origination. The artifacts of media, records of moving images, music, sounds, instructions, scripts, scores, and codes to control choreography of the manipulated objects of or navigate through many other time-based strategies involved, deserve a place of a media archive to arrive to a dynamic, dramatic stage of like expose. So in about 2007, I think Woody and Steina started to work with Andrew Edwards. It was a time when Second Life was quite hype, you know, so became kind of like a new environment where you could do things which you couldn't do in normal life. This is just a recent image of Woody Steina in the studio. And Woody was talking about his inspiration by Chris Marker, who actually parallelly in the same time he made actually his last film for In a Second Life. You can watch it. Still, it's on YouTube. And Chris Marker, he didn't do the coding or the programming himself. Somebody was working or helping him to do it, similar to Woody and Steina. And the idea of Museum of Chris Marker in Second Life was a little bit more maybe conceptually developed than the idea of Vasulka's, because Marker somehow connected with the literary inspiration, which is the famous book by Adolfo Bioy Casares, the Moral Invention. Probably you know the story. It's about this kind of simulation island, and it's maybe here comes the point. So I checked the Second Life when it became kind of famous, maybe 10 years ago, and the students have been talking about it, and I logged in and make some research, and then I left it, and now I tried to log in again and find the Vasulka archive there, but I didn't manage. I think it seems to be lost. This is maybe a technical question, if it's possible to find some other way how to recover it, or how to export it from the Second Life environment. This is again the Chris Marker. Last piece, which is quite nice. A lot of talking, as Chris Marker usually use, but this is just for the contrast. Most of the content and visuality of the Second Life, which I have been looking. It seems quite obscure and funny. And just mention one of the last project, which was partly elaborated parallelly with the idea of Second Life. This is the last big project with physical project of Woody, which is called Brotherhood, and he was working on it between 94 and 98. It actually ended up with a big exhibition in Japan, in Tokyo. There's a famous catalog. And he managed to create under this Santa Fe Art and Science Laboratory a group of people with robotic engineers and programmers who helped him to create his environment of 8 interactive robotic units who have been constructed from the surplus of the Los Alamos military scrapyard. So they have been buying objects from there, and there was like reassembling them together in a kind of huge bricolage. What is quite important to know, to mention, that the whole environment was interactive, and the visitor or actor, how Woody was calling it, could kind of communicate with each of the unit in a different way. There was a lot of sensors, MIDI interface, and so on. It was, I think, was done by Bruce Hamilton, most of the coding. So back to Second Life. Here is around 2010, 2011 time. Yeah. Woody was touring around, and he was presenting his project, which is transforming the entire archive into Second Life with Avatar. And on the end, this is the website of the Vasulka kitchen. And here is one of the projects we developed last year, which is working with the archive, and it is done actually on the Technical University, who is trying to teach some, artificial intelligence to recognize or structurize the moving image content of the archive. Okay, so thank you very much. I have also the video where you can walk through the Second Life environment with Andrew Edwards and Sture Steine Anvidi, but I think it is clear.
Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation.